Hey, welcome, bonsoir tout le monde. Ça fait vraiment plaisir de vous voir ce soir pour cette conférence avec Bharti Kher. Thank you so much for coming for this event, this conversation with Bharti Kher. De la part de notre directrice fondatrice, Phoebe Greenberg, j'aimerais dire jusqu'à quel point on est ravis de présenter une exposition majeure avec Bharti qui ouvre demain soir à 17h30. Nous aimerions aussi remercier notre équipe incroyable, Victoria Carrasco, John Knowles, Natasha Boucher, Dalia Cheng, notre équipe éducative, tous les techniciens qui ont travaillé longtemps sur cette exposition et nos collègues au Centre Phi, Peggy Leboeuf et Julie Morange de la Galerie Perrotin. It really does take a village. So thank you so much, everyone, for all that hard work. Nous reconnaissons que cet événement a lieu sur des terres historiquement et actuellement habitées par les peuples autochtones. Nous sommes reconnaissants d'avoir l'occasion de nous rencontrer ici et nous remercions tous ceux et celles qui ont pris soin de cette terre depuis des milliers d'années. We would like to acknowledge that this event takes place on land historically and currently inhabited by Aboriginal people. We are grateful to have the opportunity to meet here and thank all those who have cared for this land for thousands of years. With a career that spans over 20 years, Bharti Kher's work in sculpture, painting, drawing, and installation has received international acclaim and has been shown in over 40 countries around the world. Major solo exhibitions include Parasol Unit in London, UK, Rockbend Art Museum in Shanghai, Baltic Centre for Contemporary Art in the UK, Vancouver Art Gallery, and Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston. In 2015, she was also awarded France's Chevalier dans l'Ordre des Arts et des Lettres. It has truly been a delight and an honor to collaborate on this show with Bharti. Please welcome Bharti Kher.
Thank you, Cheryl. And I just wanted to say quickly what an absolute pleasure it's been working with the team at DHC. Technicians, guys, you're a really, really great team. It's been wonderful working with you. And thanks to my galleries, Peggy, you're here, and of course Julie and Jacqueline. Thanks for coming from Hauser and Wirth in New York.
Yes,
and,
thank you.
So it's always, it takes a lot to make an exhibition, and there's a lot of people in the background, including everyone in my studio as well, who they work really hard, and then we're able to put on beautiful exhibitions.
Well, I'm very excited for people to come and see this tomorrow. And I thought what we would do tonight is we would, we'd sort of do a three-parter. So we'd sort of talk about the intersections of your life and art, and then move into some thematics and preoccupations that you work with, and look at some past work, and then try and kind of walk us all through the show at DHC Art with, some visual aids and whatnot. But, very briefly, just to get us started, you were born in London, you were raised in Surrey, England. So this is like throughout the 70s, and your father worked in textile design and your mother sold textiles in her own shop. In that environment, when did you know you wanted to be an artist?
I've always liked making things with my hands, and I think that's something that I've always been doing since I was very young. I've spoken about this quite a bit. I was at a school where we had a very inspired art teacher, and so I think I was maybe 7 or 8, and when someone opens a door for you, and you go through this door, I thought being in the art room was enchanted, and it was a world that didn't exist like any other place. I was introduced to a lot of painting. We were looking at a lot of printmaking, photography, and I was exposed to developing film, lino cuts, life drawing, from a really quite young age at school, and we were always taught to be quite fearless with our pens and our pencils. And in the art room at my school, we were not allowed to use rubbers.
Ah, yes.
So
erasing.
so there was no eraser.
No erasing. Yeah.
And so these kind of things, I think. So I always knew from that really young age that okay, I'm going in this direction, and I'm going to go to a place where I can do this.
Right. So that means that you must have had a really amazing teacher or teachers as well to kind of say, yeah, this is possible.
Yeah. I mean, it was, if you're going to be serious in this art room, you have to go to art school. And that's it. So I was preparing probably from the age of 11 just to go to art school.
Amazing.
Yeah. So
11?
Well, you were doing life drawing classes, and we'd go to Wimbledon School of Art. When I was 13, I was going to Wimbledon School of Art to draw with the Foundation students. And there was about 5 of us in our class. And to be perfectly honest, without bragging, we were much better than all of them. And because we knew how to draw.
Yeah.
And so we were taught about perspective, the history of Renaissance painting, how to draw line, how to draw negative space. So the thing was, we were taught how to see. And if you realize that to see an object or to see art, you have to unsee it or not see. And it's kind of interesting because this idea of seeing now, of course, is very much part of the way that, and the language of the work that I make. The bindi is a metaphor for consciousness. It is a third eye. And it's a seeing mechanism. And so it also is an activated mechanism. So not only do you watch the work also watches you. And these kind of ideas of negation and positive and negative was something that, when you're younger, you don't really understand what someone's saying, but you kind of listen to it because they go rattle on and on about, draw this table. Say, okay, you're drawing this table. So we would draw the table, and then he'd say, no, you don't know, what are you doing? You're not drawing the table. Draw everything around the table. And to be able to see this table with this glass and this, you also have to see everything around this table, includes me. It also includes all the negative space and the negation and the space underneath the table. So it was about trying to, how do you draw space? So it was a very challenging but also critical way of teaching, because it was like puzzles. And when you suddenly realize that you could draw a rope, because rope is really hard to draw. We used to draw lots of ropes. And it's very difficult to do because the eclipse of the rope, and as it turns and goes round, I found that it was much easier to not look at the rope and draw it, but to look at perhaps what the rope was sitting on. And then to be able to talk about the rope, you talked about what was not the rope. And I think these are lessons that I've really picked up. This way of teaching, you'll see it in a lot of my work. Absence and negation is a very powerful tool in art to describe presence. Yeah.
I'm just impressed with the rigor of that kind of training at such a young age.
Yeah.
And that, would propel you and prepare you for, the kind of lines of inquiry that you're going to develop to become, kind of come into your own voice at a really early age in order to propel yourself through to art school and beyond, because it's not so obvious I think as an art student to see what really you can be capable of.
Well,
so it's impressive.
Also to know the lessons. I mean, I think I'm quite articulate about it now, but that's now. I mean, even up to 10 years ago, I wasn't quite connecting all the dots. I wasn't connecting everything together, thinking, well, yeah, and seeing this sort of linearity of where you start and how you move and how this all becomes a larger narrative, which is interesting because time gives you that perspective, I think. And also just to maybe stand away a little bit and be a little bit more forgiving with the practice, I think. That's something that you teach at some point. You have to teach yourself.
So you studied painting in Newcastle. So this is like late 80s, early 90s. What was studying art like there at that time?
I left London because I'd grown up and I'd lived in London. My sister also went to art school and she was at London, so I couldn't stay in London, so I had to go somewhere else. And also the London studios of at that time, all the colleges were amalgamating. And so the studios were like, the size of these 2 chairs. And I've always liked... I'm a sort of space greedy person. I like space and I like to spread out, and I've always made quite large works actually. And I think even when I was in Foundation and I was preparing to go to art school, my drawings were huge. And so when I went up to Newcastle, I saw a really big studio and I said, will I get a studio this size? And they said yes. And I said, okay, then I'll apply. Right. I'll come here. It's fine. So I'll kind of go anywhere.
Yeah.
I'll work anywhere, actually.
Was there any particular direction or framework that Newcastle Polytechnic was kind of forming students at that time? Was it pretty open and free?
Open and free.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah, I think art schools were like that at the time. And I think there was a generation in the years below me and above me, there was quite a dynamic. So there was a couple of really good artists who are still practicing. And so there was, I think it's just your timing, luck. It was also interesting. It was a very... it was that time of change where it was all really irritating that if you don't do this, then you're not an artist. And if you don't make video then you're not an artist. If you don't do photography, you're not an artist. If you do painting, sorry, who are you? And, it was just like, well, I don't know. Damn. I like paintings.
Right.
I do
you sort of had this, well, I might have read somewhere, I don't know if you would use this word, but a kind of romantic affiliation with the making of painting, the doing of painting.
I like making images. And so my work is, I create stories. So at the time, I think, to be honest, I've always probably been a sculptor. It's just that I didn't know how to make sculpture. And it took for me to go to India to learn how to make sculpture. Right. Because I didn't have anything to lose, actually. Whereas in Europe, when I walked into the tech room, it was just like loads of, there's lots of big guys in there. Right. Big muscular machines. And you were just like, okay. I was like, how do you use that bandsaw? Where's on? And, I didn't know how to make sculpture. But I think that's probably what's good about art colleges now, is that they're probably much more broad in the way that they approach materiality, for one. Because I've always felt that the material is not the message. It's what you do. So when I make work, I don't think, I've got to make something in bronze. I think, I've got to make this. Now, which is the material that's going to work to talk about or not talk about what I'm trying to not talk about, talk about. Right. How do I arrive with this sort of confusion of material, meaning this, and how can I make wood look like something else? Right. So that what you try to do is create, through material, a third dimension. So when you add 2 things together, you're not talking about wood and cement. You're talking about wood cement that makes something which is not even, there's no word for it. Because what it does, it creates an essence of something that's otherworldly. And so for me, that's important. I think painting was a really good beginning for me. And I still make a lot of drawings, of course. But, the Bindi works now have become my paintings. So I went from being someone who was a highly figurative painter to an abstract artist.
I'm curious about, the early 90s in the UK, because, there and here in North America, it was such a hotbed. It was a really interesting time, amazing discussions around identity politics. and particularly in the arts. And, you had Rashad Areen, who'd started Third Text. You have, Stuart Hall. He'd published The Question of Cultural Identity. You've got, post-colonial theory blowing up with like Homi K. Baba and Gayatri Spivak, and then Kubina Mercer published Black Art and the Burden of Representation, which was incredibly important to talk about at that time. So I would love to know how these discussions were kind of hitting your world up in Newcastle, and how you situated yourself within them. Like, what was the cafeteria talk like?
Total denial. And I was also, at some level, I was also in denial, I think. I remember going to see the exhibition, The Other Story. And what was that? What year was that?
87?
Yeah, so I was about to start art school. I was just about to go on Foundation. And I was, obviously, when I was at art school, there weren't any other Indian people at art school, because Indian people don't do art. Right. They become doctors and lawyers and solicitors and accountants. And because our generation of immigrants who came into other countries, you had to be a professional.
Right.
Your parents didn't come all the way to another country, leave their homes, work really hard in, not very well-paid jobs, or run their own businesses, because most of them were all self-employed. My parents are self-employed, and they sort of didn't do that so that you could go off and be art. Right. What is artists? What do they do? Just like. But I don't know. My parents were quite different, and so they knew that it was something that I really liked to do. And I was also a girl, so so it's interesting because you
expectations are different. Right?
Yeah, I mean whether whether that's a point of discussion. Well, it is and it isn't, and it's just what it is. I was lucky I got through some. I got through like the salamander, sort of fishing my way through, and you come out the
water,
other side.
You just went through all the fissures and cracks.
And you just come out. So the question of identity, there was, growing up for me, there was this, certainly as an Asian, we first started with, in terms of music, there was, the East End and the Bhangra, which I sort of never connected with. And I was like, what's this? It's just very macho and very, I'm Punjabi. And it wasn't my thing. And then this electric underground music scene started as well with, people like Talvin Singh. And that, for me, was much more what I was sort of interested in. In terms of by the time I had sort of done 3 years in Newcastle, where I was pretty much amongst, there were literally very few students of colour. So it was I don't really know why I do this to myself, because I sort of got there and I was like, whoa, why, what? So it was quite challenging for a while. And I think what I tend to do when I don't know what else to do is I go and make art. I lock the door and I go in and I go into my world, and I go into the world of drawing and painting. And then I think I talk about what I'm dealing with in my life through my work. So I don't always go out and specifically be an activist or anything. In fact, I go back into my studio. When I'm upset with the world, I go to the studio.
Right. Well, so you finish art school, and a year later you're like, okay, time to make a move. I'm gonna flip a coin, right? Heads, New York, tails, New Delhi, and so you. Tails it was, and off you went to New Delhi in 93.
Yeah, and it really was, but I think I was quite happy. Because otherwise I would have done best of 3 or something, like everyone else. You might have just gone, let's try again. So I think I went to London for a year after I finished college, because I didn't apply to do an MA, because I was a painter. And I thought, well, there's only one school that I really wanted to go to, that was a great school, and I wanted to go to Goldsmiths. And I thought, well, there's no way they're going to accept me in Goldsmiths because I make painting.
Right.
And painting was not sort of very cool then. So anyway, I took a year off and then thought, I spent a year in London. I was working and had a studio. It was kind of hard. It's lonely. And then I thought, well, maybe I've just got to get out of here because there was the YBAs in some ways had captured the imagination of England at that time. And I knew then that that wasn't me, and I wasn't ever going to be part of this small group or this type of work that was being made because, to be perfectly honest, one, I was too young. I didn't have anything to say particularly. Two, I was still... and my work wasn't about those things. My concerns were not the same. And I think, of course, many other artists were not too. So I had a feeling that they were going to be around for a while.
Right. So I'm out of here.
And you have to make space for yourselves. So sometimes you have to also know when to cut loose and go somewhere and disappear for a while.
And so you went to a place that you discovered was incredibly full of contradictions. Like, it had this incredible impact on you to oblige you to expand your practice and to come into sculpture in this way. What was it for you about India at that time that had this impact?
Okay, so I think in retrospect, when I arrived in India in '92, it was a very different India, obviously, than it is now. I remember in 1993, cable television just started in India. Otherwise, when I arrived, there was 2 TV channels, 1 and 2, and news would come on, and then at 3 o'clock there'd be a film, and at 6 o'clock there'd be a movie, and I'd be like, seriously, this is your television, like. And everyone would get really excited because the 6 o'clock film would come on, and the 3 o'clock. So all the, you'd be like, wow, this is like, wow, you don't have TV. So then, when I arrived, then I decided maybe I should go off and travel in India on my own. And one afternoon, after about being there for about 4 or 5 weeks, living with my uncle right in the north part of Delhi, which is like the refugee area. It was called Model Town. So in 1947, when a lot of refugees came from Pakistan, there were certain sections all over the city where they would house and give land to the Hindus that had come from Pakistan. Model Town was one of them, and so my uncle lived there. And it's really like far out. And I'd lived with him for about, and my grandmother for about 2 weeks. And then I was just like, okay, I've got to get out of here. And I thought I must go off traveling. And so I go off to this train station on my own.
Wow.
And it took all of about 40 minutes. And I turned around, I was like, okay, I can't do this. And I was such a coward. I was just like completely terrified. And I was like, no, there's just no way I can do this. I mean, I was, as much as any other person, I was completely shell-shocked. I was and I was as much a foreigner as any of you who'd gone to India for the first time would be. And it was quite a revelation to me. And it made me feel very, very foreign. And, but not in a bad way, but just in a sort of... Then I started to look and see really what the country was like. And then I decided, okay, if I'm going to stay in Delhi, because you're too cowardly to like run off in India and backpack all on your own. It sounded amazing, but of course I couldn't. I was like, no, I can't do this. And so I decided to stay in Delhi, and I called, and I'm quite resourceful in that way. Then I start to call people and say, okay, I need you to help me. I need you to do this. So I called a friend of my dad's and said, I need a studio. Can you help me, please? And he did. And he gave me a small building. And he gave me a studio. And so I started to work.
Yeah, I mean, this is very interesting because your experience as a person of color growing up in England and then coming to India gives you this, it's insider-outsider knowledge. You know, you learn a lot from that in-between place.
Absolutely.
Which, you know, seems to have kind of issued forth in the work that you're making, you know, talking about like interstices. But then you had this light bulb moment with the sperm bindi. So I was wondering if you could take us back to that moment. You know, sort of talk about that market you were in and seeing this woman.
You know, when I collect materials, it's like I collect them in the same way that when I'm making a drawing, or when I was taught to make drawing, is you start on this side or you start somewhere else and you create a series of, you exhaust a subject. Okay, so it's the way that I move through materials. I'll start it in cast it, and then I'll break it, and then I'll stick it together again, and then I'll add some mud to it, and then I'll do something else, and I'll just keep going until I've exhausted the material, and usually I'll find something. In the same way, when I realized that I don't know India, the way to know India then would be to go out. And then I would go out, and so then I'd photograph it, and then I'd take my camera with me and not. And then I'd say, okay, and I'm going to talk to 4 people today.
Okay.
Then I'd make sure I talk to 4 people I didn't know. So you do all these kind of strange, it's a little bit hysterical in some ways, a little bit OCD maybe, that I'd set myself tasks, but I would always go to the markets. And I felt that if I didn't go to the markets, and painting can be very isolating as well. No, so you know that. So if you spend all day in your studio, you can just be there the whole day and you don't get out, you don't see anything. So whereas if you start to go out, you can think about collecting, you can buy things and use that as a way to start to build the library of different sort of things that you collect, which is something I still do now. So Thursday markets in a very small area of Delhi that I lived in, which was Trans-Jamna, which was like East Delhi. Only artists and writers and journalists and people like lived in that side of the city. And I saw just like the bindi stall. No? So there's the sari stall and the bindi stall, the vegetable guy. So there's a man with the bindi stall and he's got these like little packets of bindis, and I'm thinking, wow, these are great. I mean, wow. And I asked him, do people wear those? And he's like, yes, well, obviously I'm selling them. So then I was like, okay, well, I'll buy all of them. You know, so I bought all his stock, got his number, and then he bought me more. And then and then you sit with them for a while because you don't really know. But by this time, I had already been in India for about, 92? This is 98 or 97. So 5 years. And, you know, those 5 years that I was there, I'd made loads of rubbish paintings, loads of rubbish work. And it's good to do that too. You've got to give yourself time to make shit work. And nobody looks at it. So it's great. You can just get rid of it or keep it. I've got it all. I don't throw anything away. So it's because you realize nobody's paying you any attention, so you have nothing to lose, and you can just keep making mistakes and falling over yourself constantly, and that kind of vulnerability allows you to come out the other side. And when you do come out the other side, what you have is something that has possibility. And I think for artists, that's key, isn't it? Possibility is probably the key material, right. More important than any other material that we use. It is the idea that this can be something other again and again and again and again.
I guess I was also wanting to talk about in relation to the bindi, in a sense, the preoccupation with the domestic or the mental space of the home. 'Cause it seems like the home, even from an early age, has been sort of a kind of curious place. And then taking yourself out of your home and then putting yourself in another sort of pseudo home, but not really. And then also that brings up questions about, well, was England really my home too? And then where is home? But then also like observing social codes and the way people interact together, and noticing gender relations, in India. How was that impacting on your interest, which was already somewhat there in exploring like the phantasm of the home or the realm of the domestic?
When you don't speak a language, it's like losing one of your 5 senses. So, and it's something that I write about quite a lot now, and I think about it quite a lot. And I have this thing where I say, like, making art is like being like the snake. You have to hear with your tongue. And so if you don't speak, then you watch, okay? And when you can't communicate, you listen, but you hear the unsaid. And it's like seeing, or it's like, and you kind of find these spaces between people, things, what's being said. You're able to read things that other people are busy listening to. So it's almost like being ignored also is quite interesting. If you sit somewhere, if you sit in a bar or something, and you realize that lots of people are talking, and if you sit very quietly in one space and you realize maybe no one's watching me, it's actually quite, I like doing things like that. I actually like to sort of sit.
Be a witness, kind of an observer, but in the background.
So really. What that teaches you, I suppose what you can learn from it is that you're able to pick things out that maybe other people don't see. Right. And so when I picked out, say, something like the bindi, I was like, well, it's just kind of quite interesting, isn't it? The possibility of this object, which is so simple. It's the quintessential spot, the round circle. It has so many connotations in so many different societies. It's about obliteration. It's also about marking space. It's pointillism. There's just so many things, and it's pop. It's like can be so. But then this one, if I decide that I name it, because art is also about naming. I mean, I make a load of things that nobody needs, and I do it all the time. But I've decided that I name them, and I call them art. So therefore, they are, and you follow me. You don't have to, and it doesn't mean it's true, but because by naming something and by saying this round velvet spot is a representation of your consciousness, that's kind of nice. I thought that had really positive, but also kind of quite something that could be quite profound in some ways. And when I started using them, the reasons were quite different. It was more sort of about paradox, about they were kind of ironic. I liked the shape of the spermatoza, and I liked the fact that these ladies were wearing sperms on their heads, and and they were all sort of, there was this sort of strange middle class morality, and that was quite exhausted quite quickly. That sort of that story, I think, and then it became something that had much more gravitas and something that had a lot more substance, that there was a kind of articulation and an activation of a material, because after all they are just materials, and I use them in the same way that I would use other materials. So now I can use the bindis on ready-made objects. I can use them on maps. I can use them as a language that I've created myself. So it is a language, and what I'm doing is I'm writing my own language, which is great because I can write letters and I can write to you. You can create your own space. I can make skin. I can obliterate surfaces.
Yes. It's kind of sort of a redaction. Maybe it's a good moment to look at a couple, we'll kind of take you on a little journey. to see some of these images and how you've applied them and like the many ways that you have employed this material. So this is an early work. It's from 2004, Squaring the Circle. So you were using bindis and then pressing them onto painted board or always painted board. Never a sketch or where an idea of what you were going to do. You just
I don't make sketches of the works.
Yeah.
Never.
You just go in there.
Yeah.
And so there are all kinds of, we can draw all these formal comparisons with op art and abstract expressionism and things like that. But the conceptual backbone of the bindi is actually also, because it is so open and because there's a lot of misconceptions as well, it makes it a very rich material, even in this mode.
I mean, I like the fact that they're misconstrued. I don't have a problem with that. Yeah. I mean, I want you to look at this idea of the cliche and tackle it and say, yeah, okay. So like it's often the works or often art tells you much more about the people who are viewing it sometimes than the work itself. So I always think that about my work is the way people approach it, and that tells me the scope of how you're able to see. So I don't have a problem. Yeah, take the misconceptions, deal with the cliches, talk about that they're for married women, and you do what you like. It's fine. I don't mind, and I see them. I mean, they could be mandalas.
Right.
They could be They could be anything.
Yeah.
They could be duvet covers. I mean, they can be duvet covers if you want. It's fine. I've had so many people who work in textiles say, "Can we work with you?" And we're like, "No, not really. We could do curtains."
You work in diptych and triptych as well, and so this is Speaking in Tongues. This is 2012. And then there have also been sort of readings of, these topographical type of readings, weather patterns and views from outer space of the Earth. And
see, so what happens now? The scale for me is really, really important.
Right. These are quite big.
These are 6x8. For me, the reason I continue with this scale of works is that when I stand in front of them, and this is how I decided, it's basically my arms like this, bigger, and then taller.
Right.
And so it's always the work. I mean, I'd say a very central concern of my work is the body. Mm-hmm. And if I had to talk about all the Mindy works and all the sculpture works and all, they'd somehow gravitate and move around this idea of my body, your body in a space. Mm-hmm. How you respond to place, how you respond to placement, right. how we the inside and the outside of the body, what that means emotionally, psychologically, which is why when I break it or when I break a lot of surfaces, they're about ruptures. And
the possibilities in that through that action.
Yeah. So I mean, the Bindi works do many things. They're topographical. There was a whole series of works about cell structures. Some you get the sense that they're microcosmic. Right. And they're also macrocosmic. Yeah. So you're never really sure at which part of the which part of this sort of zoom, which part you're actually in. You could be far away and you could be really, really close. So it's almost like looking at under a microscope of your own skin cells.
Yeah. This is a detail, just to see how much they teamed. I mean, there are thousands and thousands of bindis applied, repetition. They're layered. I mean, this is something that reproductions can't give you, but you really do need to experience them. It's a physical experience of them, so that you become actually aware of your body when you're looking at them. You put them on mirrors, so the ready-made or the found object also then gets the bindi treatment This one is Reveal the Secrets That You Keep, 2011. And then this one, what can I tell you that you don't know already? That was, some of us have seen this in Paris. There's a detail as well from that. And so why mirrors and found objects, etc.?
I started working with the mirror surface because I needed to, that when you saw the work, I liked the double and the triple seeing.
Right.
I'd read about this mirror called Louse mirror, and it's a piece that I made about this same time. And it was the mirror that reflected your thoughts. And I just thought, I found it completely terrifying. I'm sure most of us would, because can you imagine the things that you say all day? And if they were like said aloud, I mean, it would be it wouldn't be funny. I was, 2012, I suppose in my own life was probably quite a difficult time. And I was, as it is for lots of us when we sort of get about 45 or something, and you sort of start to look back and think. And I was kind of curious. I wanted to talk about the self and the fractured self. I was trying to look and decide what it meant for me to be a woman and a mother and a parent and a wife and so many of these other. And I was trying to, if the self was fractured, then maybe I would fracture it more. And the idea of of breaking mirrors, it's sort of almost like a punk gesture. It's like, I will break this mirror and nothing will happen to me because I am invincible. And the only thing that's going to stop me from doing, and it's actually the most amazingly fun thing to break mirrors. So you should all go off and do it. Buy yourself a really big mirror and take a bloody great hammer and hit it as hard as you can. It is the most extraordinary thing. So I've broken now hundreds of mirrors. So I have 25 afterlives of whatever, if you're a good Hindu. But actually they're so beautiful. And also this idea of meaning, faith. It also made you realize that, wow, this is, as artists, this is what we do. We put our faith, we take this giant leap of faith every time we make a piece of work, and we ask the audience, and we ask of ourselves, and we ask of our peers to follow us on this journey, and which is then to take the power of the material and to allow it to be transformative, which is, of course, what sculpture and it's the basic sort of tenement of how you make art. But then, if you break a mirror, am I confronting you with your own fears? And it's kind of interesting that something as quite as silly as breaking a mirror, but then the history of mirrors is so fantastic. So the history of mirrors is that in the 17th century, there was two great companies who made mirrors. One was Saint-Gobain and the other was Murano's. The secrets of making this alchemical material was so precious that if you were a glassmaker and you tried to leave one of those two companies, you would never they would literally get 5 kilometers down the road and they would die of poisoning. No, seriously, it's not funny. Like the amount of technicians who'd been killed because they took with them this great secret. I mean, a mirror was more expensive than a Rubens painting.
Right.
Okay, so it was one of the most precious commodities because what it represented was magic. To be able to suddenly see yourself that wasn't in a reflection or in water was so transformative to the idea of how people actually saw themselves. So, and of course, philosophy, you see from 1785, the first mirror made with mercury. Philosophy after that completely changed. The way that people write, painting changed. Up until that time, artists were using obsidian. So obsidian is like a highly polished volcanic rock. It was black. And so the artists of the 15th century, you'd be able to see the reflection, and that's how they would paint shadow. Mm-hmm. It's kind of interesting, but you saw how art changed after the invention or the discovery of mercury and glass. And so the more I started to read around glass, mirror, the psychology of mirrors, the philosophy of mirror, the writing that came out of this, it was something that you just really couldn't not then work with. So I worked with the smashed mirror for a long time, actually.
I'm going to push us a little faster, because I want us to have enough time to talk about the show and get some questions in. But these are examples. This is Rudolph and Bambi, of the bindi as a skin. So you've used these casts of life-size animals and then bindied them, creating this. So bindi is skin and you've done this elephant. You've done baby elephant.
Yeah. It's a mother and child, really. Actually, to be honest.
My goodness. Yeah. And there's a relationship with this work and one of the works in the show. So we'll push along. There's a relationship with this work too. Contents, and these are bindis applied or kind of applied to medical charts. Yeah. So again, you're sort of finding these.
They're pregnancy charts.
Yeah.
Charts. I think they were made in the 1950s. They're terrifying.
Yeah.
And this is how they would teach doctors. So they would make these charts, and they would and you're really shocking, because they were if a woman was had bleeding from the placenta afterwards, you'd think they'd take it out. So there's a chart where they put 6 bricks under the back of the end of the bed, and they raise her legs up, so it was all going back inside. It was It's I'm so happy for science that we're all from this generation, and medicine now, that, my God, they didn't experiment on us. I mean, so these works are also politically quite charged. I mean, when I talk about them, I sort of laugh, but they're absolutely serious, because we are a very, very fortunate time for as women. Up to 100 years ago, half of us would have been put in a mental asylum. We would have been locked away. And so when you see charts like this that are still around, you realize that even the medical profession, gynecology was a male profession. And you even, I mean that amazing picture of Trump in his first 2 weeks signing the anti-abortion law, 9 men lined up writing on it. It's wow. And you realize that between this and there is 60, 70 years, and we're still doing the same shit.
Yeah.
Really? Really? Yeah.
And
okay,
then,
on a more positive note.
Furniture and saris. We'll see some of these works in our show as well, but it's sort of this. Something that you say that I love is how furniture, or kind of there's staircases as well in this show that you've taken from homes, is that there's sort of the linger of the physical, of the body is still there, and saris also sari fabric is almost sort of a body in itself, or is the marker of an absent body.
Yeah.
So we'll another kind of recurring theme, this sort of coherent
absence
thread.
Again, absence, and then presence. The presence of the object that carries the history of the people that move through the object, and then the absence of the people who don't, perhaps. So there's a kind of missing, and in between the two of them is this space, which I think is interesting.
It's the questions. And then, body. I mean, it really does all come back to the body. And so you have this long practice of casting bodies, and this is your father. So
and that's my mother. So I did a project, and you'll see a piece upstairs of the 6 women in this exhibition. And about this, I've been casting people for a long time now, maybe 10, 15 years actually. I do it as a way to remember. It kind of gives me a truth that's not about likeness. Right. It's about essence. So it's about capturing something that I may miss. It's about, plaster is a 4,000-year-old technique that was, the Egyptians discovered the first ways of using plaster as casting. They believed that they used it in death masks, and they believed that it captured the essence of the body in the same way that the alchemists who made mirror used to hold the mirror to the face of the dead, in the hope that when their last breath would somehow get transferred through the mirror, and this would then go somewhere. And I love things like this. I love this way that people kind of look for transference of one material into something else. And I think art has the great possibility to do the same thing. You just have to follow it. And so when I cast, I'm capturing, I'm holding essence of somebody. And when plaster goes into your skin, it opens up your pores, and you leave your smell. You leave your essence in the cast. And we're all different, and we all smell different, and we all have something that's very much ours. And I always say to people when I cast them, I was like, only you can give me what you want to give me. And so leave here in this cast anything that you wish to leave behind. And you can give me this much, or you can give it that much. More is better. But, but it's almost like it's a bit like a psychoanalysis couch.
Right.
It's kind of interesting. And the process is interesting, but we're not speaking.
Right. No, it's really intimate. I imagine there's a lot of trust that has to go on in there. I want to get to a couple of these, because these works totally blow my mind. Because now you're casting you're still casting bodies, but then you're also
I'm doing both.
grafting.
I'm casting, so the leg is the cast, the right bit of the horse is sculpted, the top bit is cast a bit and sculpted, the face is completely made up. So I do it all in bits, and then it all gets added together. So
this is it's a real hybrid being.
Yeah.
And it's like animal, it's female, she's incredibly powerful. I just love these, bare breasts and cupcakes. I mean, it's incredibly, I think you did a photo series as well called The Hybrids, which was also kind of like at the time, and when you first showed them in India, kind of like, I don't know, ambivalently received, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean...
Strange, yeah.
People were, they were kind of like, whoa.
Yeah.
What's
Not
going on?
Not ready for that.
Yeah, what's going on in her life? It was, they were really like, I wanted to make these sculptures of women who could do anything.
Yeah.
They were really powerful, but also they were mythological. And I didn't want you to be able to place them. I didn't want you to be able to ethnically place them.
Right.
I didn't want you to have a sense of time about them, like where they're from. I wanted to amalgamate all the mythology that I love, all the narratives and the stories. Also, they're powerful, they're also vulnerable. This piece is called Woman with Cloak and Shield. Warrior with cloak and shield, not woman. And so they kind of... And I started to make like one a year. So I'd start... It would be a body cast of someone that I knew. And then they would just sit in the studio for ages until I knew what I was going to do with them. Yeah. And so I continue to do that. I still sometimes sort of see people and say, hey, do you want to come to the studio? I might, I'd like to cast you. And usually it's about something. So one of them was because I had a friend, she had really long arms. Really like the longest arms you've ever seen. They sort of go down to her knees. I was like, wow, you have very long arms. We really should cast you. And she was okay. So usually my friends will say yes. But it's kind of great fun. And then, you know, that's it. It cements our friendship.
Yeah, good friends.
Yeah. So this is a really good friend of mine. She's actually, yeah. And she has this beautiful face. She's got a face of a 12-year-old. Her face is just so kind.
And then, yeah, so as you're saying, like you bring in this sort of woman as sort of the mortal and the god.
Yeah, they're goddesses.
Kind of,
they really are.
Come together.
I call this whole series, like, very loosely, the urban goddesses. So they are both powerful and vulnerable, and there's always this level of awkwardness to them, which sort of brings them back to the stuff that we know.
Right.
So like this one, she's wearing her underpants.
Yeah.
And everyone's like, why has she got pants on? I'm like, you know, we were just casting. I was like, take your pants off. She was like, no. I was like, take your pants off. And she was like, oh, don't, you're so weird. And I was like, I would cast you with your pants on then. And then, you know, her pants stayed on. And it makes the sculpture because it's so awkward. And then she's wearing these really, really funny shoes, which are kind of like, they're housewife shoes. They're frau shoes.
Mary Jane's.
Yeah, they really are. And they're like, so there's a part of the works that are really like about you, me, us, you know.
Real stuff.
Yeah, and that's somehow the edge. And whenever I now try to make work, I learn from the thing, where is the edge? What is the edge of this piece that pushes me somewhere to this, where I'm like, oh, I don't know about that. And as soon as I get there, I know that that's maybe where I need to sort of stop and let it breathe for a while.
Yeah.
Because if I look at it in a week or 2 weeks, I'll be like, oh, yeah, that's the place of awkwardness in the work, or the place of where I'm feeling quite uncomfortable, or there's failure somewhere. And you just let it sit, and sometimes it just comes and it becomes something else, which is actually
what
allows the work
to
to take off somewhere else. Yeah.
Well, we're now getting into a little bit about the show. I just want to make sure, I'll come back to that slide. But we have quite a few Bindi works. I mean, we have Heroides starting in the 451 building, the ground floor. We have the series Heroides, which is fairly recent, but it's Ovid's The Heroines. It's these incredible letters, and you've been trying to read them. You've been trying to get through them.
They're all very cryy. They're great. Some of them are great. They are. They're amazing.
Yeah.
But what I really liked about it was that Ovid claimed, and nobody really knows how to date these works either. So if you look at, sometimes they say 6th century, and then somebody will go 9th century, and somebody go 12th. So there's like 500 years, and you're like, oh, that's very straight. And so the more I started research, the more I couldn't actually kind of find a date. But Ovid claimed that he was the first person in history, in writing, to write in the voice of the other. So he was the first man to write in the voice of a woman. And of course now it's, everyone does it. And now, women, I sort of feel like women now sort of finally sort of taking their own voices back, because like almost for like many years everyone was writing about, I think a lot's been written about or spoken about now, certainly about female literature, and there's this really funny stuff that's going around now. Is like, anyway, we won't talk about it. But Ovid was Ovid wrote, there were 14 letters called the Heroides series, and they were letters written by women to their loves, their lost ones, the men that went away.
That wronged them.
And so these are, and I've been making these over a period of about 5 years maybe. I haven't finished yet. Whenever I feel like writing a letter that I don't need anyone to read, I make one. There you go. So, yeah.
We also have portrait sculptures. and we see this, sort of concrete pillar, and then the use again of these saris. The saris are found in that they belong to women you knew.
They do and they don't, and I think it's something that's I talk my work is not about truth, and that's not what I'm particularly interested in. There can be an element of truth in that if you have a sari and I've taken it from you, I'll put it in my work, and I name the sculptures. These are all a series of portraits. And I name them after people I know, but I swap them around so they don't know who they are. Otherwise, it's not fair. You can't, it's not biographies of people. So it's really about talking about presences and a way to... I have this idea that... I like the idea that maybe after 20 years, all my hybrid women sort of will meet somewhere. Yeah. Like a B movie somewhere, and they'll all meet in some museum or something, and they were like, "Hey, how are you? I haven't seen you for 15 years. Oh my God, look at you were cast ages." And eventually they'll all meet up. And the same as the portrait sculptures, they'll just eventually, it'll be like a room full of girlfriends, women, people that know each other. But the saris are interesting because you have 6 meters of fabric. They're quite fantastic. So when I was casting clothes, and the reason I started making the sari pieces was because I was trying to put clothes on my sculptures and I couldn't make it out of clay because I wasn't good enough. So I was like, oh shit, how do you cast a skirt? So I thought, well, let's put a skirt on and put some thing in and make it hard. Actually, it worked quite well. And then I was able to get this material. I like materials, so I like to experiment a lot in the studio. So we will find a way how to make a skirt hard so that I don't have to sculpt it out of clay or something. And eventually you get to the point where you think, oh, actually, this is quite an interesting material, but I need more fabric because shirts are quite short. Short. European clothes are tiny, and there's not enough. And so you have 6 meters of unstitched fabric, which is... which are also just so interesting in terms of their formal meanings. The 6 yard unstitched garment is used to clothe, but also shroud. Right. So in India, when the body dies, they wrap it again in 6 yards of, white cloth. So it's I like that. I like that spiritualism or that philosophy of how material can become something that's bigger than us, bigger than ourselves, and that it somehow has, again, you go back to this idea, the leap of faith of the object, of the material. And it's also about who we are as Indian people, and these are our stories, these are the stories of our culture, of who we are, and these are the narratives that we send out to all our, to our families and our friends and our people.
It's an intimate, clothing is intimate. Clothing it's next to the skin. It again has that lingering, that perfume of the person.
Saris
and the
beautiful.
Narrative.
Yeah, they're just so beautiful. It's such a beautiful garment. The average Indian woman it's outrageous. They own hundreds of saris, hundreds. It's almost embarrassing. If I go to any of my friends' houses who are over in their 60s, I say, show me your cupboard. And they go, no. Show me your they will not, because you get saris given to you by your grandmother. Every woman in India will have 1 sari or 2 saris, at least from her great-grandmother.
Wow. And
they get passed down from mother to daughter to mother to daughter. And so they'll have holes in them, but they'll have moth holes, and they have to be kept in a certain way. You have to roll them and open them and air them. So you're passing down not just... You pass down the smells of each other. You can even, because it just wraps around your body.
Yeah, it's a drape, it's a fold and a tuck here and there. And
that's it.
And there are so many ways to do it too. I was amazed at all the possibilities with that fabric. We have bindi paintings, some recent ones, which again you have to experience them. We can't appreciate, although they take on a painterly quality when we see them as reproductions, but in person it becomes really layered, textured kind of physical experience. And then this work, which is with those bindi paintings, which have a kind of pop aesthetic, and then we have this work, which is again a total mind blower. It's called Mother and Child, and so you found this mannequin, or you traded this mannequin with a friend for some wine, and then cast it, but had it for a while, didn't know what you wanted to do with it.
These are they're from the 60s. So when my mom used to have a sari shop, then she used to have these mannequins in the window, and they're quite fantastic actually. They're made out of plaster, and I have many in my studio now because I've been collecting them all over the place. But this was the first piece that I made, Mother and Child, 2000 and what was it? What does it say?
Mother and Child.
14, maybe 14. So I make. My work is quite cyclical. It's not linear, really. I just go round and round, go back on myself. But I have certain things that I keep doing, like they're like the rituals that I have. So I have in the studio, I have the bindi works, which I go to every day. It gives me like a sense of my space and the balance. And I always say my studio is like my body. And each floor, I have 4 floors in my studio, and each one is integral and absolutely imperative to how the whole body functions. And then every day I kind of tend to all the gardens. So the sculptures I've made over the years a series of Mother and Childs, and they have many different iterations. Some are very tender. I've done a series of castings of all my friends when they are pregnant. So usually 8 months, last week, right. And I run over to their house before they're about to pop, and I do a quick cast. And so I've got many of those. So I've done a series of works with their belly casts. So this piece is quite a difficult piece. This came out maybe a year, 6 months after a very, what do you call it? Notorious rape case in India. You can't even say famous because it's so disgraceful. Where a woman was gang raped by 5 men on a bus, and they so brutally assaulted her that she died after 2 weeks. There were riots across India in the streets, there were protests, and it was probably the first time that women had come out so actively against violence. I think the brutality was just so extraordinary that it was I was in a market one day, and someone walked into the stationery shop. I was just buying something with my daughter or something for school, and this woman came in and she died. And everyone in the whole shop just went very, very quiet. And a lot of us just started to cry, actually, because it was just so painful that this kind of violence could be, that something just so awful could happen in the city at 9 o'clock at night. And anyway, so this piece came out, and this is really about, so here is the mother, and she has her boys. She gives him, when you have a son, if you have a child, I have children, you give your children everything. You give them your body, you give them yourself, you give them, and so you feel almost like your children carry your heart inside them. So here, this woman, she has her left breast cut off, and her breast is on the back of her son. Mm-hmm. But I'm sort of saying in this work, who are these boys that we're bringing up? Who are you? Do we know you? Mm-hmm. And so this work was shown in Delhi very soon after, and it was received. I don't know. I mean, people were just I suppose everyone knew exactly what it was.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of one of those works. So although it's here, I made it for Delhi. I made it for the city of Delhi, actually.
Mm.
And the woman behind, is her shadow.
Yeah.
So this is that's her altar, who follows her. Yeah.
What I would love to do is I'll take you back to that slide that was sort of misplaced of this mysterious box. And we'll close it up. We'll close our part of the conversation so we can get some questions. But maybe we could end our part with a little bit about this mysterious box, because it's part of our show as well. We have one for this show, Virus 9. And this is a series. I mean, this is like a really long, it's a 30-year project, which you started in 2010. Inside the box are these hand-dyed bindis, 10,000 of them. And then we had the nerve-wracking honor of installing them in a spiral on the wall, directly on the wall. So it becomes like this spot, in this kind of virus integration or like kind of attack in our spaces. But tell us, there's something about this series about, how you've organized it. It's marked with a historical event, but it's an historical event that you have invented. And we get into a little bit more of the fact that you're an amazing writer. You write these things. You write. You're an active sketchbook. You have an active sketchbook practice where you also write. Your diary excerpts that you share with us in some of your publications is incredibly powerful. And so I thought maybe you could share with us a little bit, just give us a sense of the totality of this 30-year project.
Okay, so we'll close and I'll just read what this project is. So Virus, okay, I'll just read it to you. An artwork that is conceived as one whole to a part of a 30-year project beginning in 2010 and ending in 2039. One artwork will be released a year to mark an entry into a space somewhere, like a time tunnel that you can climb into, or a vortex, or a womb, or a safe hole. A mutation of color and patterns so light, a virus of kind so subtle, that no one will notice its slow and transformative essence, except you. You have chosen to become part of this project that will culminate when our children have grown older and have left home. You and I may or may not be alive. Our lives will have changed in ways that we cannot imagine now. Wars may have been waged, or natural disasters that wreak havoc on civilizations will change humanity to rethink its relationships to other living beings and our planet. Cities may never sleep again, and people that live longer than before can roam spaces of changing realities that have been mapped digitally and created in our minds. This work is only for you. Others will continue to change as I meet time and add narratives. And so what I do is I predicted the future for 30 years. And what I do is the end of every year, I add in what parts have actually happened, parts of my own personal narrative and my age. So, for example, I wrote in 2010, the first artificial life form, Mycoplasma laboratorium, is created. True. It's a new series of bacteria with a man-made genetic code originating on a computer and placed on a synthetic chromosome inside an empty cell. Using its new software, the cell can generate proteins and produce new cells. WikiLeaks, an online publisher of anonymous and classified material, leaks to the public over 90,000 internal reports about the United States' involvement in the war in Afghanistan from 2004 to 2010. More followed. I'm 41. And so I kind of keep going. So I'll just read you 2017. China established its larger megacity in the world with a population of 42 million people. Electronic papers more sophisticated than e-readers are now in widespread use. No. The first full human transplant will be carried out. I want to work in the studio this year. No shows are planned. I'm 48. And so basically what I do is this work becomes both fictional, about truth, a kind of truth, about time, age, specificity in terms of my own life, but also it jumps backwards and forwards. And so over a period of time, maybe 30 years, I'll have a book which then marks all the entries into different spaces. But also when I start to go back and install works from 2010, I have this idea that I can time travel.
Thank you so much for sharing all this with us. And we can take a couple of questions. Please don't be shy before we close. So please. I think there was in art education gang. There was a question about the pillars, the concrete pillars of the portrait sculptures, because there's all kinds of things written about that they're kind of their bodies, in that they have a certain weight or relative weight and height. And some of the writings say that you were thinking, okay, well, I'll maybe use my body as, a kind of reference. And some of them are taller and shorter and more thick and more skinny. So is it based sort of roughly on your own dimensions? Yeah, they're my weight, actually. Okay.
Yeah.
So even though they change dimensions.
Yeah, they just have, they're hollow inside, so they have longer tubes inside them, and some have shorter. But we try and keep them about my weight, which is 62 kilos. Just so you know. So anything between 60 and 65 is okay. Such a drag.
Well, yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah. So no, basically they are, and it's quite interesting because when we first make them, and I sort of go to when my techs cast them, and I go wait, and they are 66 kilos. And then I get a bit upset with them, and I'm like, take 1 kilo out. I don't care how you do it. Just take it out. They sort of look at me like they think, what's the matter with her? She's bonkers. Yeah. I get really upset. So I do. I make them.
You're the artist. You can.
I just go. That pipe needs to be thicker. It's just got too much cement in it. Clearly. But that's the fun part, those are the fun things to do in studio, where you just sort of go, let's just make this at this weight just because. Mm-hmm. Because it's not truth, but it's just, it's a discipline. And I kind of like those little disciplines that I have. It makes me sound like a nutter. Yeah.
Thank you so much for the talk. Hello.
Yeah.
I'm really looking forward to seeing the show tomorrow. I wanted to talk about the idea of consciousness, just because you mentioned it several times. And, there's theories now that consciousness is really what is in between things. It's actually not situated in the body. And so I was wondering if you might have a comment about that, that's given your interest in consciousness and space in between, and so how you talked about negative space or the different uses of space, or actually the relations within space and with space. So would you care to comment on that?
I always thought that making art meant that I traveled in another axis. And when I see art, I don't know, when you see art, don't you sometimes feel that there's only you and no one else in the world? Or sometimes when you see a really great piece of work, everything in the world stands still. It's almost like something has been held for you, that this work has the most perfect equilibrium, and it has an absolute point of contact that is so, I don't know, it's just, it makes me sound like a nutter. Yeah.
Thank you
sublime, and people write about it. Philosophers have written about this idea of the sublime, this idea of space where there's no movement, where there's such a stillness that, and then the way that we make art, we create a lot of volume in terms of frequency. You create frequency. You have to activate the space around the work, and that is like it's almost vibration, isn't it? It's like frequency. How do you describe it? What do you say? What words do you use to move something that's immovable? How do you move wood? How do you make cement move? You can't make it move on its own in a singular. It has to be, something has to meet it to create that third thing that we look for. Maybe that third thing is the naming of consciousness, if that's what you want to call it. I make a lot of triptychs, trilogies, things in three. Three is a kind of, three is the magic number, isn't it? And it is because 1, 2, and then you create the third. The third is the enigmatic. And so I think art sort of is a language that we can't ever grasp. It's the way that you know, and that's why I find it so exciting, because I know I will never make. I'm always looking to make, and I'm never going to get there. And that journey for me is really, really great. I'm still chasing it. I'm chasing something, always chasing something, and I don't actually know what I'm chasing. Looking for this chimera that I'm never going to be able to grasp. I'm never going to be able to hold it because it's not tangible. So.
Just to continue with that, one of the first notions around consciousness was recognizing a threat in the environment. So it's really what's going on in between again, right? So if you're saying you're chasing something, I think it's particularly interesting because it says that it's a relationship that is continuously changing, and maybe that's the quest, right? So it's not within the body or outside of the body, but obviously in between. Anyway, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, if there's no other burning questions at this moment, and everyone will come and see the show, which will run until September, we will close here. Thank you so much, Bharti. It's such a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming. See you tomorrow, 5:30.